For the modern state, the primary concern is no longer ruling unjustly. The fear is governing too much. In his 1979 lectures at the Collège de France, philosopher Michel Foucault identified a specific turning point in history. He pointed to the middle of the 18th century as the moment a new art of government began to take shape. Up until that point, the medieval and early modern sovereign exercised power from the top down. But suddenly, a new demand emerged from the governed. When asked by the state how it held commerce, merchants replied with a simple phrase, laissez-nous faire, leave us alone. Modern liberal governance did not emerge out of a sudden moral awakening. It emerged because the market shifted from a space of justice into a space of truth. To understand our own societies, we have to recognize that our political boundaries are not dictated by morality. They are dictated by the economy acting as an objective truth-teller. To prove this, Foucault asked his audience at the Collège de France to adopt a very specific intellectual lens. He called it methodological nominalism. Assume universal concepts like the state do not exist as predetermined facts. Instead, we must look at the specific, rationalized practices of government. We analyze actual mechanisms, taxes, regulations, policing, to see how the state is artificially constructed through action. Traditional historical analysis treats the state as a permanent cold monster that slowly evolves through time, dictating events. Foucault flips the formula. The state is the puppet born out of specific ways of governing. Foucault applies this method to the dominant European model of the 16th and 17th centuries to see how power functioned before the modern era. We cannot understand power by staring directly at the state. We have to look at the specific regime of truth that tells the state how it is supposed to act. Before the 18th century, the governing logic of Europe was raison d'etat, or reason of state. This rationality aimed entirely at maximizing the wealth, strength, and competitive edge of the nation. The only external limit placed on this ambition was the European balance of power. States maintained a tense equilibrium through diplomacy and permanent armies to ensure no single empire could absorb the rest. But internally, there were no limits in the police state. Government power was infinite, regulating every detail of a subject's life. The only counterweight was the law. Jurists used original contracts as external, rigid barriers that the government was forbidden to cross. Under this legal framework, evaluating a ruler was a strictly binary calculation. Did their actions violate an established legal right? If so, they were illegitimate. If not, they were legitimate. This meant that raison d'etat was structurally unbalanced. A sovereign was free to micromanage human existence into infinity, provided they didn't explicitly break an external law. By the middle of the 18th century, the emergence of political economy introduced a new way of thinking about government. The earliest economists were not anti-state rebels. They actually shared the exact same goals as the mercantilist kings. They wanted to increase the state's wealth, population, and military leverage. But studying trade, they identified a nature specific to governmental action. Spontaneous mechanisms run underneath society, operating independently of the king. If a government violates these mechanisms, like fixing grain prices too low, it inevitably causes a famine. The intervention fails regardless of legal rights. The old metric of legitimacy versus illegitimacy was replaced by a new standard, success versus failure. For the first time, limitation became internal. The state now had to calculate its own boundaries based on the natural reality of the things it was trying to manage. Under this new regime of truth, a ruler who causes economic ruin isn't acting as a wicked prince, they are simply ignorant. This transformation in how we define truth didn't happen in the abstract. It occurred in a highly specific physical location, the market. Looking at the left side of this illustration, we see the medieval and early modern market. It functioned strictly as a site of jurisdiction. It required constant autocratic regulation to enforce what was called the just price. The state intervened to ensure wealth was distributed fairly and to protect the buyer from fraud. It was a moral courtroom. This brings us to Foucault's core observation. The liberal market operates as a site of veridiction, or truth-telling. When the market is left alone, spontaneous mechanisms of supply and demand engage. Together, they form a natural or normal price. This natural price strips away all connotations of moral justice. It is an objective standard of truth that allows a government to verify if its policies are correct or falsify them if they are wrong. The wisdom of the sovereign was replaced by the truth of the market. The economy itself now dictates the exact boundary between too much and too little government. This realization triggered an immediate crisis. If political economy proves that a state must limit itself to respect the objective truth of the market, how do you encode that economic limit into public law? It's a structural paradox. Historically, law is based on human will and original rights, but the economy is based on spontaneous nature and mathematical truth. The West invented two competing methods to bridge this gap. Solution 1 is the axiomatic approach. It cages the government by asserting inalienable human rights, declaring exactly what the state cannot touch. Solution 2 is the utilitarian approach. It asks, is this intervention useful? If not, the state's competence ends. The West never truly chose between these two distinct approaches. We bolted them together, creating a structural conflict at the very heart of how we govern today. Foucault argues that we cannot view this through dialectical logic. These two paths, original rights and utilitarian efficiency, do not eventually merge into a perfect, harmonious synthesis. Foucault describes modern liberalism as an unstable tension, holding together the axiomatic rights of man and the cold math of utilitarian calculation. This unresolved historical tension is why contemporary political debates are so fractured. Every day we watch claims of inviolable human rights clash directly against arguments of economic efficiency. Statesmen in the 20th century inherited this exact tightrope. They are forced to navigate a government that must respect human freedom while simultaneously bowing to the laws of economic growth. This is Foucault's enduring insight. Power is entirely defined by the regimes of truth it is forced to obey. The birth of biopolitics signaled a shift in focus. We left behind a world obsessed with asking, are we ruling justly? And entered a world obsessively asking, are we governing too much? As long as the market operates as our ultimate site of veridiction, its invisible truth will continue to dictate the limits of our political reality and our personal freedoms.